to reach. So thank you for coming, and a real welcome to Reach, our Research Culture Week. My name is Noelia Noel, and I'm a lecturer in astrophysics at the University of Surrey. The rest of the team is composed by Sophia Lillengen, she's a PGR, Stacy Kim, she's a PGRA, Arman Aryapur, a PGR, and Tariq Hilmi, PGR as well. So research culture encompasses the behaviors, the values, expectations, the attitudes and norms of our research communities. It shapes the ecosystem in which we operate, and it influences who is doing research, what research is done, and how that research is communicated. Research culture impacts on the integrity of research, the equality, diversity, and inclusion in research, the career path that researchers follow, and rewards recognition, the fundamental character of collaboration in the research system, as well as well-being of the researchers. So what happens when there is a poor research culture? Poor research culture has serious implications. For example, it can slow progress towards open science, it can discourage interdisciplinarity, and it can inhibit the flow of research between academia, government, and industry, affecting the ability to recruit the best researchers and to support an innovative and creative research environment. For all these reasons and more, we should care about the culture in which our research is generated. Hopefully this week will contribute to reform the system that shapes culture. We will have outstanding speakers each day with a different theme. Today, Monday, we will focus on research culture as a whole. On Tuesday, we will discuss engagement. On Wednesday, we will touch on the attainment gap. On Thursday, we will talk about career development. And finally, on Friday, we will dedicate a day to health and well-being. And today, after our first talk, we'll have Emily Farran talking very briefly about our open research competition in Surrey. Our first speaker, Professor David Sampson, is the Pro-Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation at the University of Surrey, with wide portfolio responsibilities for research and innovation. The title of his talk is Research Culture, a Personal Journey. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor David Sampson.
Thank you very much. So I'm just trying to share my screen here. So let me see if I can do that. And I just need to find my talk. There it is. And I think we're off and running. Thank you very much for that introduction, and what a vibrant introduction it was, and what a great idea to run this Research Culture Week. I have to say that I'm actually on leave this week, but I think I'm going to be dialing in for lots of these talks because it looks really fascinating. So today I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of research culture from a personal standpoint. And I think the reason I've chosen that is because I don't think it's that personal at the end of the day, and I think you'll see why in a moment. So let me begin by just describing the raw ingredients for successful research and innovation. No surprises for you here. It's a simple proposition, really. It begins with talent, and it begins with time, giving talented people the time to do their research and innovation. That can be augmented by money, and it can be augmented by critical mass, but those are two optional ingredients. They're not always necessary. But whatever happens, the culture of research and innovation is what turns the process of doing research and innovation into an enriching, rewarding, and noble endeavor. So institutional culture is defined as deeply shared values, assumptions, beliefs, or ideologies of members. And there are two aspects that strike me there. That is that this is an individual issue. Culture is individual, but at the same time it is deeply shared. And the other aspect of this, which is important to consider, is one of innovation, and that is that our culture goes beyond simply research, but also into how that research is converted into innovation. And so where did Surrey's culture come from in that context? It's very important to understand that we derived originally from the Battersea Polytechnic Institute. Our first students were admitted in 1894, and our goal was to educate at the further and higher level the poorer inhabitants of London, and we were specialising from nearly the outset in science and technology subjects. Let's just remember that culture has deep roots. It is very similar to reputation in that regard. It takes a very long time to develop, and it takes a very long time to change. And so undoubtedly, in our DNA and our institutional glue is the culture that we have developed from our origins in the Battersea Polytechnic Institute. So, but of course, our culture comes from other places as well. And I'm going to start in part one of this talk about where my own research culture came from. And that was very much about learning on the job. So my introduction to research was very much a voyage of discovery. It began in my second year of university. I was invited by my professor of chemistry to come and work in his lab between terms. And I spent 6 weeks distilling water, which is not very exciting. I was making some of the most pure water on the planet. And I did that for 6 weeks on my own in the lab with occasional chats with him. And I found it absolutely thrilling. You could see I was already hooked. I then commenced a year of research in my honours year in physics. I began that by unpacking a crate of antiquated equipment from Queen's University Belfast in Western Australia, where I discovered British plugs and amazingly different looking things, and eventually assembled an instrument which could do atomic spectroscopy. I then moved from there when I left university into the oil business in Europe, and then found myself in a startup company in Canberra in Australia. And from there I joined the University of Kent, at which point I commenced a PhD. So at that point, I was really, despite all of those experiences, and I was 30 years old by this stage, I really had a deep sense of apprehension. Can I actually do this? Am I able to do original research? Can I have novel ideas and execute those novel ideas? And still more, can I climb the mountain of Everest to convert them into a published paper? And there you see the front page of my first paper published in May 1990, after commencing my PhD in April 1989. So the answer was yes, but I didn't know that. And I remember distinctly that deep sense of unease about stepping into the unknown, which I think many people share. But I did feel that I'd climbed the mountain, and the suggestion that maybe that what I'd done there actually needed to go more beyond a published paper would have rocked me, would have created a great deal of uncertainty, because I already felt that I had achieved all that I could. So very much largely self-taught in research. I spent a lot of time reading, a lot of time doing in the lab, and a lot of time talking to colleagues within my group. But I very much worked on my own, even though I was in a community of scholars. And that community was a large research group of 20 or so people, and a department in which the tea room culture was strong. And so there was a great deal of interaction, a great deal of warmth, and a great deal of sharing of scholarship. But still, the notion of actually collaborating with other groups of researchers and doing collaborative, what you might call truly collaborative research, was still regarded as somewhat of a novelty. It did happen, but it just wasn't anywhere near as common as it has become. In fact, I would say the environment was both competitive and to a high degree secretive. Ideas were protected. They were shared very carefully. They were handled with a great deal of care. But the environment in general was curious and scholarly, and dare I say it, to some degree noble. The intentions were honourable. The atmosphere was rarefied, and it was an absolutely delightful environment and experience from my perspective. So much so that when we had the opportunity to come together as a collection of people who had been through this research group, we joined at Kent in 2015 to celebrate a 2-day conference of the career of our leader, Professor David Jackson. So he must have done something right. So I picked up my professional practice very much along that journey. I learnt to review papers by essentially interacting with my boss who was asked to review papers, and I would see his eventual response after making some suggestions and having a go myself. I learnt that I was quite good at telling stories, so I wrote grants at a very early stage, but I was never instructed at all in how to do it. It just turned out I wasn't bad at figuring it out. And I took my own approach to supervising students, and I have to say with mixed success. I did have some great successes, but I also had some what I regard, particularly with hindsight, as failures due to setting up things not properly. So I had some learning to do there. And I had no training whatever in rigor of research methods or in ethics or in integrity. I very much relied on personal values, as we all did. So I think I would put to you all that actually many academics share my experience, and I think that you are actually being led by maybe more than a generation of self-taught individualists. But meanwhile, times have actually changed quite a bit, and I think one of those primary changes has been the agenda of universities to generate public good. They have embraced that willingly, and governments have certainly pushed for it, that there is a much more direct connection between what we do in research and innovation and how that benefits society and the public. At the same time, I think collaboration has largely displaced competition as the main measure of success. And so I think a measure of success previously was a strong individual who was able to garner large resources within a university, the so-called silverback gorilla model. And I think that's been the competitive advantage that was shared by that approach has been undermined by a more communicative, collaborative set of soft skills in modern leaders who are able to be effective in working in large interdisciplinary projects. I think that's been an encouraging development. And so working in teams has very much become the norm in many disciplines, and you can see some slightly faded backgrounds there of my experience, which came to be very much the norm of working, organising and working in large teams of people. So that's my personal background, but now I'd like to reflect on how we see the research landscape changing. And I guess let me start by just observing things that haven't changed. And the first one of those, I think, is career paths. I mean, I think career paths were always poorly defined. We think of it as a modern phenomenon, but I think it was always been there. And I'm going to say something specifically about that later in the talk. But I think the reason that it didn't surface until relatively recently is that the sector was actually quite small. And so these types of problems went unnoticed, but they were undoubtedly there. I think part of the other thing which hasn't changed is the attraction of the job. I think it was more attractive in the period from in the 60s until the noughties, but it remains a very attractive job. I think essentially we have too many people seeking permanency within it. In that regard, it reminds me of a career in acting or perhaps a career in music. I've known many talented classical musicians who seem to be absolutely awesome, but are unable to actually secure a place in the system. Now, that does not mean that the system should be able to somehow exploit that opportunity, and I will come back to that later in this talk. But I think it's something that we have to recognize. It is a very attractive job. So what I wanted to talk about then, again, in context of then and now, is how we actually go about judging ourselves as researchers. And so in the past, I think the underlying principle upon which we all conducted our activities was the one of individual academic freedom to pursue knowledge for its own sake. And that knowledge was actually generated writings, and those writings impressed other specialists. and added to the canon of human knowledge. And the measurement of the performance of the research was really based around individual excellence. It came to be based, I think, ever more so on the volume of that research. Initially, quality was not being well judged, but it also depended upon the esteem of the individual. And by that, I mean ostensible esteem indicators like being invited to give lots of conference talks, or being awarded fellowship, or winning prizes. I think that's changed. We now not only still have the remit of generating knowledge, but we now need to directly participate, or at least oversee, the translation of that knowledge to impact for the public good. And that is relatively new. Writings still need to impress other specialists and still a primary output, but we now have this output of impact. And we still measure things by individual excellence. I think volume still plays too great a role, but we've seen the rise of the measurement of quality through impact factor and citations. Again, I didn't start to look at the citations to my work until the late 1990s, at which time I would go to the library when I could fit it in to look through telephone book-sized indexes listing exactly where my papers had been cited and by whom. It was an incredibly arduous and painful task to do. Of course, we've seen then the commoditization of that, and so now we all have Google Scholar pages, and so we can look up at a keystroke exactly who's citing our work, and we know the impact factor of the journals we're publishing in. And in fact, we've seen that metrification go through a phase of rise and fall, and it is now well out of favor with organizations such as DORA. And of course, we don't want to see it used inappropriately. But nonetheless, all of us who are participating in research are still thinking of impact factor when we're deciding on where to seek to publish our research. Esteem remains pretty much as it has always been, but now we have also to consider impact estimates. So it is an enrichment of the landscape, undoubtedly. So within that, let's consider for a moment our journey as researchers. Do we actually know where we are going? Who taught you how to do impactful research? Did anyone explain to you that that was a part of the deal when you began? Because they didn't explain that to me. I think the how, of course, is very important, how to go about doing impactful research, but so is the what, exactly what you work on. And the notion that you should be free simply to make an unfettered choice, I think, is one which is going to be ever more constrained by the significance and the impact of what you're doing. So what do you choose to work on? Do you perhaps follow the institutional imperatives? Does the institution specify priority areas that it wants to work in? Do you look for challenges, big picture global challenges like net zero, and seek to work on that? Do you engage with society's issues at whatever level of society you seek to work in? These are all very valid questions. And then, of course, there is the question of, can you just choose because you want to? And I think the answer must always be yes as academics, but then how do you balance research without an application, without yet a perceived direction, with that which has a very clear applied path? And I think what I would like to say to you about this is that these questions are bigger questions. They are questions for society, they are questions for universities, they are questions for leadership, but they are questions for individuals as well. And I just wanted to emphasize that I think you are actually on an evolutionary journey as researchers. Perhaps you haven't fully appreciated that, but we are in a very, very significantly changing environment. So in that context, how do you differentiate between excellence and impact? And should you? Is there a trade-off between pursuing these two? Is one mutually exclusive in relation to the other? Or is, as in physics we often like to think about, is there a conservation law in operation here that excellence times impact equals constant? Or should your research exceed some particular excellence impact threshold? This is meant to be a thought-provoking cartoon of a plot of excellence versus impact. you know, if your research was to fit somewhere along that red line, then it's quite conceivable that you could be doing very excellent but lowly impacting research, at least as understood at present. Or you might be doing very highly impactful research, which doesn't actually extend you intellectually, which might be regarded as not particularly excellent. I think it's fair to say that your research should fit somewhere on this plot, and it should be somewhere hopefully directed towards the higher end of the impact scale, or the higher end of the excellence scale. So I don't wish to somehow be for you to think that I'm being prescriptive in showing this. I'm really just asking you to think about it. What do you think, and where does your own research fit in? And you might say that actually I have an alternative justification for that, and that is the passion that I have, you know, that my research I truly believe in, and my research matters. But again, I would ask you to reflect on, you know, the excellence that you are demonstrating. You know, are you actually, is your research highly original? Are you using, you know, the right methods? You know, is that goal within your reach? You know, all of these things are individual decisions for you about how you're going about doing your business. So, and then I'd just like to reflect on another community, and that is the people who are involved in the management of research. And that management of research is also very challenging because impact is very hard to quantify and measure. It's easy to tell if you submit a patent. It's easy to tell if you start a spin-off company. But even in those cases, whether or not your patent turns into anything, whether it enables an invention and leads to the creation of wealth, or whether a spin-off company is a success or a failure, ultimately determines impact. But of course, impact is much broader and more subtle than that, and it is much harder to quantify many other instances. Part of the reason for that is because the timescales vary so much. If you create an app tomorrow that allows us to contact trace very effectively, then your impact will be immediate. But on the other hand, what you do might require a number of other factors, or might require a maturation process, or might require the creation of a market which may not exist for decades. All of those things mean it's very challenging for us to be able to measure impact. No one's really sure how to deal with these uncertainties. And no one's also quite sure how to deal with how much effort we should spend as an institution, or even you as an individual, on seeking to convert your knowledge into outcomes, into useful societal outcomes. Should we have an army of impact officers to work with you? Exactly how we should be organised is not yet clear. And we're also grappling with the broader knowledge exchange agenda, and how to structure it for support and how to capture that impact. We are in that being very grateful to be guided by the knowledge exchange Concordat and by the knowledge exchange framework, and the leadership being shown by Research England to take us on that journey. But nonetheless, it is at the moment still a work in progress. So again, I think it's important to recognise that this new culture is being forged both by researchers and by administrators. So we are all on this journey together. And another aspect of this journey which I wanted to emphasise is the rise of teamwork. I wrote a blog on this more than a year ago, and it reminds me that I haven't made the progress that I'm going to present in this slide that I would have liked to have. I think the rise of teamwork has happened everywhere. It's not just in academia. It's also as specialisation has increased more generally. Everyone is so deeply specialised. The problems are also tend to be more complex and interdisciplinary. That means that we need to assemble teams to be able to get the job done. And I think that's certainly been the case in academia. In my own research, you know, I've worked on medical devices, optical medical devices, for doing surgical guidance and diagnosis. And that means that we have had to assemble everyone from physicists who understand the basics of light propagation in tissue, through to a wide range of engineers, including biomedical engineers who know how to actually put these systems into clinical practice. We need to be challenge-led by surgeons and other medical researchers including pathologists, and then we end up in a surgery with a large team of professional medical specialists. And ultimately, we need to understand the power of the studies that we've undertaken through incorporating statisticians. It's a very wide specialist team. And that's obvious from the data. If you look at PubMed papers, so this doesn't cover all disciplines, but it covers a wide range of the life and medical sciences, then the number of authors between 1910 and 2011 has steadily risen exponentially, and we can simply extrapolate that data. So at 2020, we're sitting around the 5 to 6 authors per average number of authors per paper. Of course, this is just an average. And so indeed, we're seeing the effects of this, rising incidence of teamwork in the raw data coming out of our field. But I have a question, and that is, we recognise that individual scholarship does remain, and where it remains, the question I have is it the best way, or has it just become the cultural norm? And again, I think that's something we need to reflect on. I think there is a role for individual scholarship. It should remain, but it may not remain everywhere that is currently present if it is just the cultural norm rather than the best way to do things. And I think that those debates are slow to happen. Certainly, though, we have a reward system that strongly supports individuals and doesn't know what to do with teams. I think we don't ourselves have a well-evolved understanding of how to set up, how to train, how to encourage, and how to reward research teams. And I think that's something that we really need to do a better job on. So that's the main comments that I wanted to make about that. So in part 3 of this talk, I want to just talk about how we can go about supporting researchers better, and give you a broad overview of some of my thoughts on that. And I want to begin that by just taking a quote from last Monday's Wonky, which I'll just read the part in bold. It says, there's a clear desire for a cultural shift away from process and bureaucracy towards a culture that puts people and their well-being at its center. And I think I have a very strong resonance with that. And I think it's one of the hidden benefits of the pandemic, that we are thinking more about people and their well-being in the center of our culture. And I think that applies to research and innovation equally strongly as other aspects of our endeavors. And I think there are some key elements that are really important for me. And one is openness and transparency, which I think feeds into awareness, and then inclusion and respect. And for me, these are all the absolutely key vital ingredients. And I just want to make some observations in relation to those. I think the first thing that is important to recognize is that, we do like to write down lists of values. That's not the same thing as achieving them. And so I think in some areas we are doing a lot of how. We have got a lot of action plans and we're actually trying to do things, but I'm not sure we do enough of the how, in particular around openness and transparency and awareness. These things tend to just be implicit in the background, and sometimes I think we need to take more actions to embed, for example, openness and transparency in what we do. We fail to ask questions about things like, are the minutes of this meeting publicly available? Why aren't they? What is secret about this meeting? Can we make it not secret? Can we increase transparency? And I think we can be much more transparent than we are. I think not all cultures within universities understand each other, and I think sometimes we forget that. And of course, that's true for the sense of differing ethnicities and coming from different countries. But it's also true for cultures within the institution, for example, between academics and professional staff. It's pretty much true across any cultural axis that you want to draw. And so I think it's, again, something that we understand that when it comes to perhaps overt societal equality issues around race, but we tend to maybe forget it for some of our own cultures within the institution, and I think it's important to remember it for all. I did have one example, and I don't know if you agree with me, but I've certainly observed on my travels over the years that the standing of research-only staff and research students varies it often varies within an institution by department. And I wanted to ask whether your department or local area passes these test cases for your inclusion. Do you get the all staff emails? Do you get invited to the department meetings? Do you know what's happening in your department, or are you constantly discovering things? Are you invited to the Christmas party? And are you invited to important visits by executive board members? Somewhat tongue-in-cheek. I think those are important questions, though, important test cases for your inclusivity and standing within the areas in which you operate. And so then the question is, well, if not, what do you do? How can we lead on what we expect things to do? And I think that's brings me to a very important topic. I've written there a charter. Do we need a charter? I think that could be useful, but I think it's very important to recognise that actually a strong culture and a well-being culture really must be co-created. It must be lived. It must be owned by all. It can't be created by edict, and it can't be created just by declaration. It's much easier to define than to achieve. And as I indicated at the start, it works to long timeframes and thus requires constant attention. And of course, it extends well beyond the spheres of research and innovation. I think it's very important for a culture to seek to identify the experiences of others. And so I call that the in your shoes element. Does the culture have a capacity for empathy? And that means empathy for all other different individuals within it. The in your shoes aspect is often difficult to achieve. And I think it needs to also demonstrate on the spectrum of decision making and of approach a spirit of generosity if it's going to be effective and successful. And then I think we need to be accountable as an organisation and reward ourselves and pat ourselves on the back for successes, such as introducing our new rainbow crossing. But then I think we also need to call ourselves to account for rather poorer efforts, which I think is the advertising campaign on the backs of the lavatory doors, which I don't think holds us in high achievement. So it would be remiss of me not to say something about research integrity. And so I really want to emphasize two aspects: transparency and the need to actually take action. I think, again, coming back to this overarching point about transparency and awareness, I think lack of awareness provides fertile ground for things to go wrong, and lack of transparency creates that lack of awareness. I think it then allows poor behaviours and practices to remain hidden, whether or not they're being sought to be hidden. They just simply aren't brought out into the light where they can be dealt with. I think open research is a really great initiative in that regard, and I think it'll help with this enormously. And my question is, and I know Emily is coming on after my talk, my question is, do you know what this is? Have you read our new position statement, which sets out our overarching expectations on open research? We've been a leader in open research at this institution, having been active since 2005. But we've just refreshed our position statement, which not only lists what we expect from you as researchers, but also what we expect from our institution. I would refer you to it and hope you take a chance to have a look. We are actually doing a lot on integrity. Our integrity and ethical frameworks at Surrey have improved a lot over the last 2 years and are still a work in progress, a very active area where we're introducing and refreshing policy all the time. Indeed, we have appointed Emily Farron as academic lead for research, culture and integrity only a year ago, and we have become a founder member of the UK Reproducibility Network. And of course, we have an academic lead, and we have had for some time in equality, diversity and inclusion, and that's the latest person to take up that role, who's currently very active, is Emily Williams. And we really welcome the intersection between research and innovation and EDI. So again, in the context of all those actions, can we train to better prepare people? You know, as I said, I pretty much learnt my own research integrity and ethics on the job, and were very much developed from my personal values, which emerged from my primary school education in reality, and what I learnt from my parents. I think we can do a better job. We are doing some things, but I think we can do still a lot more. And this is something in which you know, I think there's a journey for all of us in how to do this well. But we are being directed quite strongly by the Concordats. They are very much coming to join with us, and I think there's a lot that they have to offer. Here is a list of them. We have advancement of knowledge exchange in higher education. We have engaging the public with research, open research data, openness on animal research in the UK, support the career development of researchers, and support research integrity. I've pulled out a few of them in the rest of the slide just to show some of the bodies and organisations that have been leading efforts in these areas, but that's not complete. The Concordats provide us with a great deal of guidance, and they are continuing to grow in strength of that guidance in terms of expectations on us as researchers and innovators. I will draw your attention to just one aspect, and that is the Concordat developed by Vitae for researcher development, which now specifies that we need to provide 10 career development days per annum. And I think that's something that is not widely yet fully appreciated in our broader community. So this slide just shows that we are in fact getting a lot of help. These are the relevant legislation, frameworks and other guidance under the red headings of equality, diversity and inclusion, employment, wellbeing and mental health, professional and career development, research charters, frameworks and other related statements. So, you know, part of you, I think, should have some empathy for us who are seeking to be guided by all this information. But part of you should also, I think, take the message that the sector, our society, is setting much greater expectations on us and providing us with much more direction and guidance about what it expects on this journey from research and innovation. So before I think this is my last slide on part 3 of the talk on supporting researchers better, and this is about defining career opportunities and paths. And you know, I think it's important to recognise that research and innovation has evolved. The ecosystem is much richer than it was some time ago. And I think it's really important that we recognise that and that we value all parts of that ecosystem and provide career paths for all of it. And I think that that thought is shared now widely. But I do think that we have questions to ask ourselves around the mixed messages we have sent as a sector. We have provided pathways for people to stay in the system when they are essentially exploitative pathways. When tough love might have been the better option. I mean, in reality, we have to recognise that academia isn't for everyone. And I'm guilty of that myself. On several occasions during my career, I have supported postdocs for extended periods, you know, always just giving them that one extra chance to make the jump across to the academic career path. Ultimately, they've not made it. And I've realised with hindsight that it would have been better for me to actually better for them. And of course, it's not about me, it's about them. Better for them if I had actually shown a bit of tough love for them earlier on and directed them to more, allowing them to direct themselves to more appropriate career paths. I think that's often not discussed, but it's a difficult and important point. So as institutions, we have to ask ourselves the questions about how we avoid that exploitation, but still provide fresh opportunity within the organisation to develop careers in academia. And clearly that is very much a balancing act, and one which we're actively considering at the moment with our strategy refresh. How do we then provide this right balance of turnover? Well, actually, for us, the fact that we are so close to many other institutions, some of them highly competitive institutions in central London means that we suffer a degree of turnover that perhaps leans towards, on occasions, too much. But I think there are other things that we need to think about in providing career paths. For example, support for transitions. And I think one of the most important transitions is from a PhD to a postdoctoral position. And I don't think we offer much to support that transition. We may think about doing much better in that regard in the future. And I do think that our work over the last few years in being very strongly supportive of fellowships as an autonomous pathway into academia is a very powerful one, and one which I think has been continuingly well supported by the funding councils. I think it's a great way for peers to choose the brightest and best, and to allow those people then a degree of autonomy to make their way into an academic career. And I think the other thing we do need to give some thought to is how we go about stopping things. I think I'm in this regard, I reflect on what happens in Germany and Switzerland when a professor comes to the end of their career, rather than appointing a successor from within the group or from without. They stop the group. They dissemble the group. They go to the trouble of, even if it's an experimental group, of giving away all their equipment, and they start something else new elsewhere. Now, again, that seems very harsh, but it is definitely a way of stopping things. And I think sometimes we allow things just to continue on in a way which actually stifles new opportunity. So it's an important point. Okay, I'm going to just very shortly say something about the really important topic of engaging with the public. And I'm going to do that by beginning with this reference to a talk I heard just last week by the CEO of UKRI, Professor Dame Ottoline Laser, who spoke on supporting the whole research ecosystem and presented it in this very attractive way, demonstrating that it has a sort of iceberg effect of much of it being invisible to the public. And it has this rich network of interconnections, which I think we recognize. But she also emphasized the importance of public belief in research and innovation, and began with, I thought, quite an engaging statement that engagement with the public is much more than an expert explaining their research in lay terms. Quite thought-provoking. And I know Jim Al-Khalili will speak to you, I think, tomorrow. And so I'm sure that he will describe the importance of public engagement in a way that is far better than I can do. But nonetheless, I think it's really important to think about public trust in research. But and I think open research and transparency is helping a great deal in that regard. And I think things like the UK Reproducibility Network is very important for all of us to believe in the results that we're generating. But I think it goes beyond that. It goes to this point of public belief in the value proposition of what we do, and in the fact that we are spending public money in the best way possible. I think that's a really important consideration, and I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be at the moment. Research and innovation does not pass the so-called NASA cleaner test. When President Kennedy asked a cleaner at NASA what they were doing, and they said they were helping to put a man on the moon. When you ask a person walking down the street, should they be investing in research? Should public money be going into research and innovation? Where does it sit on the priority list? That they're not going to give the NASA cleaner response yet. And so we still have a much more sophisticated challenge ahead of us in how we think about our public engagement and how we go about actually co-creating the value proposition of spending public money on doing research and innovation. So I'm going to wrap up at that point with just my key take-homes. I think that you are actually in a research culture which in many ways hasn't changed for decades, but does need to. It's driven by the self-taught individualists, but the game has moved on, and so we need to adjust and make adjustments for that. I think it actually is right now changing what it means to be a researcher, and the culture and the systems need to catch up with that. I think that we can do a better job of being transparent and open. I think they are much more empowering than we perhaps realize in the creation of a robust and strong culture on many fronts. And I think a richer engagement with the public is absolutely vital at this time more than ever. They need to not only trust what we do, but also to believe in and value the benefits of our research and innovation. And I think a rich research and innovation culture is absolutely critical to underpin that. So with that, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for an excellent talk. And it is a little bit strange, isn't it, that you finish and you have no response from the participants, and it feels like, oh, but we have quite a few participants, and it was a very enlightening talk. So we have some questions. So I will start reading them out loud so everyone can hear them. So first question here, it says, thank you for your fantastic talk. The graph showing the number of papers per author per year is increasing, it shows that it's increasing exponentially. How can we as a whole try and communicate the message that we need a compromise between the quantity and the quality of papers?
Yeah, well, I think that chart showed the average number of authors, but if you were to look at the quantity of research, it would also show the same exponential growth. And I think, you know, therein lies the challenge for us all. What is the driver of that exponential growth? Is it need? Is it a societal need? Or is it really a consequence of the growth in size of universities because of the scale of education that we're undertaking? You know, in the 60s, the percent of the population that went to universities was certainly less than 10%, probably around 5%. But you know, now the population of people that are within the Greater London area, 18-year-olds that go on to university is I think touching on 50%, may have just exceeded 50%. So that then means there are a lot more people engaged in teaching those individuals, which means there are a lot more people engaged in research. And so yes, I think it's a very valid question. I think this is why the public engagement question is so important, and why the personal reflection question is so important. We all have to ask whether we are making best use of public money. Do we believe in our research, and we believe in the benefits that it's going to produce? So it's an important topic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So we have another question. Oh, it disappeared. So I'll go for another question. So from Priya, when you talk about tough love and encouraging people not to attempt to stay in academia, do you agree that this could perpetuate biases about who should stay in academia? Who should be deciding who's cut out for academia? And if research culture is changing all the time, doesn't this change too?
Yeah, look, I think you're quite right. I think the question has multiple dimensions, and you know, but I think you know, in the relationship between an individual and the person who is managing them, so whether that be, you know, their supervisor, you know, I think that's an important candid point of conversation. I mean, ultimately, an individual's future must be in their hands. But the question is, you know, how are you facilitating that journey? How are you facilitating the thinking? Is the mentoring noble and for the right reasons? And you know, and are the career structures within the organisation fair? You know, because again, I think that they're not always fair. They can be exploitative. They can be perpetually seeing people on very short contracts stay in the system, but never actually advance beyond that that vulnerability that creates. And so I think it's about honest conversations and about fair systems.
Thank you. So we have another question here. Thank you for your talk. Given that individual fields, departments have their own idiosyncratic research culture, for example, citation styles, size of teams, etc., which were formed beyond the scope of individual universities, what is the role of the university in changing them?
Well, look, I think that's, I think that the question of how a culture is formed and grown, I think it does have those multiple attributes, but it has to be, I think, at the level of the whole of university. It's about leadership and example. It's not about coercion and prescription. And so, yes, a strong axis of the culture is developed within a discipline. So a research culture is actually developed across multiple locations in space across the country, and in fact, often very international in the way the culture evolves. But it's not in isolation of the cultural elements that apply locally between disciplines. So, some things are more common than others. And so the question there really arises around the level of detail that we're talking about there. But, I think, co-creation, I mentioned, I think that's a really important concept, that conversations around what the culture looks like and how to actually improve the culture is something which needs to be co-created with individuals working within all of their communities, their discipline community, but also within their university community.
And David, do you have any particular tip or advice for young PGRs or PhD students, how to transition from PhD to postdoc, and for early career researchers into a more senior role or a permanent position?
Yeah, well, I think, I think there's it's hard to give specific advice about that. I think you've got to be bold and you've got to go for it. I think you've got to have an element of luck as well. I think being able to make a really realistic assessment of your own attributes is also important. What are you good at? Where do you fit? And having good mentors to provide that is very helpful. But at the end of the day, there is an element of luck involved. And I think you just need to think through the journey. In my own case, one of the things I didn't think through when I first left Perth in Western Australia to do my PhD at the University of Kent in Canterbury, England, was that there was no automatic path back. So I had embarked on an international life. And, if you're a person who's deeply rooted in one place, you need to think that through before you embark on that type of career choice, because, that sort of goes with the territory. So I think it's coming to those realizations as early as possible, and asking yourself the question, do those choices fit for you? Have you got the right skill set and the right attributes to potentially be successful in the system? And then beyond that, you need a bit of luck. But I think you also need good direction. Mentoring helps a lot in those circumstances. And I see many bright PhD students end up in the labs of colleagues who are able to offer them jobs. And so there is a community out there, and you should definitely avail yourself of that community.
Thank you. So I think we can now draw to an end, and it was a lovely talk. Thank you again, and I hope that you join us for the rest of the Research Culture Week, David.
Indeed, thank you very much for the opportunity to.
I will do the clap in the name of everyone. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Now we have Emily Farran, and Emily is the academic lead for Research Culture. Hi, Emily. So you're going to talk about the Open Research Competition, so I will leave it to you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through just a quick introduction as to what open research is. So hopefully you've heard of open research, and hopefully you've seen our new position statement on open research. But it's all the things David was talking about. It's part of this changing research culture, changing research landscape. So open research is practicing research in a transparent way. So it allows others to contribute, to collaborate. It also allows research, enables other people to reproduce and replicate your research. And the pandemic has worked in my favor in sort of raising people's awareness of open research. So most people have heard of what a preprint is now, which I don't think 6 months ago I could have said that. So many of the research papers that are coming out at the moment during this pandemic are preprints. So they haven't gone through peer review, but they've been made openly accessible for anybody to read. And in fact, the report that was credited with introducing the first UK lockdown was a preprint. And what we can see from that as well, I've just put a screenshot up here related to the code that was associated with that report. So that was made openly available, anybody could access it. And it meant that an independent group could go ahead, have a look at that code and see if they could reproduce exactly the same model as Neil Ferguson's group did. And they were able to publish to say, yeah, we can reproduce the results. And so this kind of open availability of code, of data, of all of the different parts of our research process just ensures transparency in our research process. It makes people trust our research. And it also can improve the rigor of research. It can improve the quality of our research, because at every step of the way, we know that people are going to be looking at all of the decision processes that we've made. So at Surrey, we're promoting open research. Open research can be way beyond open access of articles. It can be about sharing data, sharing your software, sharing your code. It can be about pre-registering all of your analysis plans before you collect any data. So really thinking through your research questions and every single step of the process that you need to go through in order to get to your results and your interpretation of your results. And it can be about using open licenses, so Creative Commons licenses, etc. And also just creating ORCID IDs and having a kind of personal DOI of who you are as a researcher. So we've got 2 open research competitions. I'm going to go through each of them in turn. The first one is an Open Research Case Study Award. David talked about working in teams, so this is open to individuals or to teams. We would like you to tell us about how you practice open research in a 600-word case study. So we want to hear about how you share data or how you use other people's data for your own research. And I've put lots of different examples here of the different kinds of things that we would class as open research, but please, feel free to get in touch if you want to talk through anything that you would be thinking about entering for the competition. So the deadline is the 4th of January. You have the chance to win £500. And also we will use these open research case studies to publicise the open research from our university on our external facing web pages. We'll also have a showcase event where we will showcase all of the open research that's been shortlisted for this award and the other awards, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the second award is something that's being run by the Surrey Reproducibility Society. So this is an ECR-led society, which is linked to all of the different principles of transparency and open research and reproducible methods and results. And so if you want to join the Surrey Reproducibility Society, just look them up on the website. They're also linked through from the competition details. So they are a really great society that run a lot of training, have newsletters and workshops. So what we're interested in for this competition is people writing almost like a how-to guide. So you have 1,000 words. We'd like to know how you champion open and reproducible research in terms of how you've learned about it and how you would kind of instruct other people to go through the processes that you've gone through, how other people can use of this particular aspect of open research that you've had experience with. For the winners of this, there is a £500 cash prize again, but also top two in our shortlist, so the winner and the runner-up, will also have the opportunity to publish their a sort of worked up version of this short article in F1000 Research, which is an open access journal. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to contact me or to contact the Surrey Reproducibility Society. So this one is open for postdocs, PGRs, undergraduates, placement students. The Open Research Case Study Award is open for staff, postdocs, PGRs. So there's something for everybody. Any questions, then please do just get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Very interesting opportunity. So I hope, well, I will encourage everyone to try and apply for this. So we reach the end of our morning session, and we will have our second and last talk this afternoon with Dr. Kate Hex. Kate is the head of humanities and senior lecturer in English at the University of Exeter, and her talk is entitled Reach for the Sky, Thinking Globally on a Budget, Plotting Your Career in a Pandemic. So it's a very, very, very good title, and I'm sure that it will be an excellent talk. So I hope to see you there this afternoon. Bye.